welcome everybody back from coffee. So I hope you guys are refreshed, ready to go. So we have now the expert panel discussion, and we have 5 eminent practitioners, policymakers, thinkers, strategists, planners in the underground with us today. The theme that we're going to try and have a discussion on is when concepts turn into applications, challenges and solutions for underground space development in compact metropolitan cities, right? So I have to remind everybody that there's a live Q&A, right? So you do have an opportunity to post your own questions, and that will be then processed by Tom over there, his hand up. So we have to go through the process of logging those in, and then he will then post them up on the screen, and I don't know what they're going to say, so whatever Tom chooses gets put up. So the account name is questions@ACUUS2018.hk. So in the app you can see it says live Q&A. So there's a small button to press, and then you once you log into that, you can then post a question and it'll automatically go to Tom, okay? So the format today is how we have some brief introductions for about 15 minutes. Then we have about 45 minutes for discussions with the panelists. And then we go into the open floor discussion session where the questions that you've posted will then be presented to the panelists, okay? So today we have Dimitri Kaliampakos, and I'll go through and just introduce them, the people here, the panelists, and then I'll ask them just to give a small short introduction of themselves and why they're interested in underground space. So we have Dimitri Kaliampakos, the president of ACUUS. He's a professor in mining at National Technical University of Athens. Thank you for being here. Then we have Han Admiral, who is co-chair of ACUUS. He's a thought leader and strategist in the use of underground space, and he's recently written a book on that subject. Thank you for being here, Han Admiral. And then next we have W.K. Poon, who's the head of the Geotechnical Engineering Office for the Civil Engineering Development Department of Hong Kong. And he's been instrumental in promoting and developing some of the underground space projects in Hong Kong. Thank you for coming. And then we have Ilkka Vahaho. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Is it good? Okay, good. So Ilkka is the chairman of the Finnish Tunneling Association, International Activity Group in Finland. And he is the head of the geotechnical division in Helsinki. And he has put forward many of the aspects of the underground space and the statutory plans for underground space development in Helsinki. And then last but not least, we have Mr. Lim, the CEO of the URA Development Authority in Singapore, and he's spearheading much of the underground space studies in the city, and many of those are coming through, and he gave a great presentation yesterday on how that was developing in the city. And thank you guys for coming. Thank you. So I'd like to move over to Dimitri to sort of set the scene of how he's involved in underground space and what his interests are.
How am I involved? I don't know. I think that there are various circumstances. I have a few good stories. Actually, I have many good stories about the underground space. I would like to start from one of them. It was something like 20 years ago, and it was my first time I visited an underground nuclear waste repository. I was kind of afraid. What was that? I put on my Geiger detector to see what is the radiation, things like that. And at this moment, I realized that there was a group of high school girls behind me, very fascinating to visit the place. And then the place was something like 800 meters below the earth, and we wear all these uniforms and the things that you've seen in the movies. And there, sometimes the light fade out, and we start listening Pavarotti in the underground space within a nuclear waste repository. At that time, I understood that the underground space is not only something bad, but necessary. But it can be very intriguing, very inspiring, very fascinating. This changed my mind about understanding the underground space. And this perception follows me all my way onwards in this field. This is my introduction.
Well, my hairs are just as grey as Dimitri, so I have to go back 20 years as well. It was actually pure chance. I was working for the Netherlands government, and I was doing all kinds of jobs as a civil engineer. And then all of a sudden, I was asked, "Would you like to do a tunnel?" And I said, "Yes, that's okay." And it happened to be the first tunnel in the Netherlands that we started doing with a tunnel boring machine. So. And I was involved there as a project manager, and people said, "Well, why are we using tunnel boring machines? What is it?" And then we had this enormous vision that we said, the way civil engineers think, hey, we've discovered underground space. There's a lot of space out there, and we need to do something with that. That's the typical way an engineer thinks. He sees space, so you use it. And in reality, the past 20 years, I've actually moved from being an engineer to, I always say I'm trained as an engineer, but I'm a planner by heart now. I've come to realize that the underground space is a very nice asset to have as a city, but you need to be very careful in which way you use it, because it can actually influence the life of a city. When you talk about things like the urban resilience, you have to really know, as Dermot Campbell pointed out yesterday, what kind of geology do we have as a city, and how is that going to support our city, or is it actually maybe going to threaten the city in time? And at the same time, you can discover that there is a lot of possibilities to start using it. But then the way you use it is also, are you going to use it just to store cars in there and build car parks, or is it actually something that's going to contribute to the urban fabric, to the urban metabolism, and enhance the city life? So you can see from the terms that I'm using that I've actually moved beyond concrete and steel to something else. And that's what the book is about that I wrote with Antonio Cornaro. In many ways, it depicts a journey of at least 7 years in which we discovered that there are other things about underground space than just to use it.
So it's almost an autobiography, is it? Life history.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but yes, it might. In part, it is. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Han. Okay. WK.
Yes, I'm a geotechnical engineer, and our office is primarily responsible for safety in Hong Kong. But as a geotechnical engineering office, we also look in other aspects of geotechnical engineering, including tunnel, underground space development. And our office has been promoting the use of underground space development for many years. In Hong Kong, the granitic rock, the volcanic rock, they are very suitable for, and also the mountains there, they are very suitable for underground space development. And so over the year, we carry out studies, and we promote the use of rock cavern. And recently, we also study urban underground space development. But in this process, we see that there are many challenges and hurdles that we need to overcome. So my mission is to overcome these hurdles. And we launch a study and put forward the cavern master plan and pay many institutional arrangement, etc. And we hope to see more projects done in coming years.
Okay, thank you, WK. Ilka?
Okay, I started as a civil engineer, and my main interest was ground improvement when I started in the late 70s. And until 2005, it was my main interest. And we have still good cooperation with Japan in ground improvement. And one of my colleagues is at the moment at the airport where you have this reclamation project going on. So we have still good cooperation. But since 2009, somebody was asked to tell about underground master plan to Budapest, World Tunnel Congress. there was no voluntary except me. So ever since that, I've been asked all over mainly Asia,
Okay.
to tell about underground master plan.
So you're
And
the-
tomorrow morning you will hear the whole story if you are interested.
Okay, so you're the spokesman for the Helsinki government on the planning and the statutory nature.
Actually, I feel more like being a tourist office. Yeah.
Okay.
People are several times per day, they are asking by emails, by phones, and so on. Can you tell me? Can you send me? Can you come?
Okay.
And so on. As we have met also with Mark since
Yeah, I know.
12,
Yes.
11, several times.
Yeah, we've been part of the tourist thing for you as well. Thank you. Okay. So, Mr. Lim?
I started out wanting to pursue architecture and engineering, but ended up as a planner. So I've been working as a planner over the last coming to 3 decades. When I first started work, I spent a lot of free time walking around Singapore to find out what is happening. And my first encounter with the underground space was many big holes in the ground. In the early days, we have many quarry sites to extract materials for building. And I always wonder whether we can turn those holes into something that's useful. I think we have realized some of the projects, some of the quarry sites has turned into it become part of the national parks and recreational ground. We have turned one of them into ammunition storage facilities. But now that I'm taking charge of planning work in Singapore, we feel that many of the projects have been done in a very sort of ad hoc way, opportunistic. There is a need to look at underground space in a more holistic and systematic manner to see how we can optimize the use of space. So that's what we've been trying to pursue going forward. So coming to this conference and chatting with many of the people here gives us a lot of opportunities to learn on what more we can do to push the frontier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lim. So some of the issues, I suppose, is... No. So yeah, so reminder on the conference app. And the next slide, yes? No? Okay, 1 minute. No, the one before that. Oh, wait, no. Well, okay, you click and I won't click. The first one. That's forward. That's back. Sorry. Technical problems. There you go. First one. Sometimes underground gets a bad press. So we have difficulties with excavations, problems that occur because of the underground tunnels and so on. So how can we actually try to show people what the benefits are of underground space? There's obviously various things that get in the newspapers and people get worried about some of these things because of the construction difficulties. So here there's some examples from Singapore, from China, from UK. So, these are some of the issues that we have to deal with in terms of convincing people that underground space and tunnels and those sort of things are relevant. And so how do we do this, and is it really getting to the point where we're not doing this anymore. We're not making these mistakes anymore. So, any comments on that?
Okay, I'll make a statement. I think it's actually a lot easier than we think. And what you need to do, or what you actually your aim should be when you're a project manager, is that you should think of your project as trying to build up on social credit. I always call it. And we have many examples. I'll give you 2 examples. We had 2 railway lines being built in the Netherlands at one stage. One was the running from the north to the south. That was the high-speed passenger line. And we had one running from west to east, which was a dedicated cargo line. And the high-speed line actually had a strategy that before they even started the project, they already got together with environmental groups and they started talking about the project and looking at the benefits. And they discovered that one of the benefits was that they might actually offset the short distances that planes need to cover, etc. And So they came up with the slogan "Flying without wings" for that project. So that was a slogan that the project didn't come up with. It was they did it with the environmental groups. Okay. The other project was the cargo line. That was done in the traditional way. The engineers saying, "Okay, this is the best thing you can do. So get out of my way. I want to lay out the line." And what you saw in practice was that the one project had already built up what I would say is social credit in terms that people had a very positive attitude towards the project. The other project was actually already having a bad press before they started. If something goes wrong in either of those projects, the one that already has a positive press, people are readily will accept it. You know, in my own project, it was a pilot project, the first TBM. We had a blowout. Now, I was told not to call it a blowout because people get into a panic, so we call it an instability of the bore front or something like that. But you know, I was quoted in the press as saying, "This is a pilot project. We're doing it to learn from it. So if we hadn't had a blowout, we wouldn't have learned anything from it." So it's the way you frame it then that people start to talk about it. Now, if things start to go wrong on that scale, you know, with houses disappearing, then obviously you have a different problem. You have a larger problem in that, you know, you can question whether the people working on the project know what they're doing. But I think this is the balance you need to strike. You need to, you can't just say, okay, we get a bad press because, you know, when you have a disaster striking your project and your project already has a bad press, it just escalates and escalates into something that gets worse and worse and worse. So we need to learn to adapt to these things, but we need to start with asking ourselves, what is the need of this project? How do we justify the project? And if you can give that a positive attitude from the beginning, you can cope a little bit better with these things.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. WK, any comments on, you know, from a sort of regulator's perspective on these sort of things? Because that's, you know, yeah.
Yeah, you know, no, Hong Kong is just such a congested area, and any construction, if you do not do it properly, it could cause nuisance and also damages and disruption. So, you know, in recent years, there have been many projects successfully completed. And I think the reason for all this success is proper risk assessment and proper planning is important. You know, there are some tunnel construction just below buildings, you know, in the congested areas, in the central and then area where we extend the MPR9 and all these tunnel construction, they are very close to existing foundation, close to building. But with proper monitoring, proper ground improvement design, so it was done without problem. I think engineer, we got plenty of experience. We know how it could be done properly. To layman, general public, I think they don't care about this. They just see the end result. Okay, so far the construction, we have many construction, it looks okay. Then they feel comfortable. But to layman, normally, what is more concern? The concern is whether there's a need. And in Hong Kong, people generally concerned about whether this is worthwhile, the project is worthwhile, whether you control the budget properly, whether the time is any delay. They concern about money and time more than technical because they believe, okay, engineer, you know how to do it.
Yeah, but I think what you said earlier about the projects that have no problems, we don't celebrate them probably as much as we should do, because these are the headliners. These are the ones that give us a bad press. But actually, we don't you know, say the successes, and we don't advertise them as well as we should do. Any thoughts on that?
Would you like ours back?
Yeah, I will take mine. This is mine. And Hans, of course. Okay, to deal with these such cases, there are two approaches. The first one is to say just shit happens everywhere, and that's all. But I think that this is not the case, because it seems that it happens to our field more often. And we should think a little bit more on this. I think that, because there is another very interesting point on that. Underground projects are business, and business are very reluctant to uncertainty, and underground works bear uncertainty by its nature. by their nature, which is one problem. The other problem is this fact. As a society in a planet scale, we have already consumed, we have already destroyed the first layer of the cake without knowing it. But by putting everything, everywhere, underground, without having the faintest idea where it is now, that's we have so many problems. Because this should ring a bell about the necessity of planning. Because in order to go deeper and deeper to the other layers of the cake, we should do it in a very planned way. This is a necessity for our business.
I think very much the same as Dimitris, that knowledge is what we need. And we need to know what kind of ground we have. And we have to start the investigations much earlier than the building works. And we need to have the old data, and we always need some new investigations. Yeah. And also, not only the ground, but what's in the ground. Existing tunnels, existing foundations, etc., etc. And during the construction work, we always have to monitor. And luckily, we have good systems today. So for example, if something happens, I will get it to my phone immediately. Yes. Yeah. Day or night, weekend or whatever. Yes.
Well, yeah, the digitals and sensors and monitoring is much more sophisticated these days, and you can hopefully take more action before things happen. So, sorry, Mr. Lim.
Just want to follow up on one of the comments made about the changes to regulation to try and better manage risk. When that station construction and Nickel Highway collapsed, after that there was a review of the regulatory regime, and many requirements are tightened up to make sure that a lot more stringent safety measures are taken. I just want to caution that we should not overdo it, because for us to pursue the underground frontier, cost benefits, we can always talk about it, but what has been holding people back is the cost of creating the underground space. So the more tighter we squeeze, the more stringent we make it, the harder it will be for the project to proceed. So while we want to take a very cautious approach, make sure that the preparatory work, all that are well done, I think we have to be quite conscious that do enough, do enough, look at the performance, and then don't overdo it. Otherwise, you'll make the whole entire project very costly. After that has happened, I think we carry on to continue to build our rail structure, the rail tunnel. We're going to do another 150 kilometer length of it. It doesn't stop us from doing, but it makes us a lot more careful to make sure that we take necessary precautionary measure. But I think I believe over the last 10 years, there's been a regular review of the regulatory requirement to adjust so that we try to find the right balance in managing the risk.
No, I think there's a lot of lessons learned from this, and it's been put back into the code, the guidelines, and the standards, as you say. So, the lessons learned are key for that. So the next image was one on sort of resilience and some of the other external threats, and some of that might go to climate change, it might go to terrorist attack, and so on. And the numbers that Dimitri gave yesterday about one of the stations, 100 million people going through it, some of these events occurred. So, for example, the sarin attack there in Tokyo, if there's 100 million people going through, the risk of you being caught in an incident like that is very, very small. But actually, the public perception is that there are these inherent risks and these things we need to deal with. So, any comments from the floor on those ones?
I can start by saying that I totally disagree that the underground space is more dangerous than the surface. I'm fighting this idea. There are some common ideas about the underground space. One of the most mistaken is the fact that the underground space is more dangerous than the surface. Let's take the major dangers. Fire. But fire is something that can be burned, and air. But in the underground, we can handle ventilation, and this is quite of a tool in dealing with fires. Earthquakes. we do know that the underground space is much less vulnerable than the surface for various reasons. Our scientific committee knows it very well, but not the public. This is the same for almost all the major dangers. So, I would like to start by saying that we should rearrange the thinking of the public about the underground space in dealing with major threats. Threats are always existed and will be. But we are in a position to deal with them in a more easy way when we have to deal with the underground space. This is my point of view.
Any others from
I hope at some stage we will be celebrating actually the virtues of underground space, because I'm getting a bit depressed from all these pictures. But no, I agree with Dimitris. I mean, it's quite easy to show the most awful pictures of what can go wrong in underground spaces, but you can show the same pictures from, you know, highway accidents or planes that have come down or whatever. And you know, I mean, people still fly despite of what has happened. I think you need to show a responsibility as an industry in the sense that you say, okay, we know that these issues are something we have to deal with. Safety and security are obviously things that need to come into consideration when you look at underground spaces. And yes, fires below the surface in enclosed spaces are a little bit different than others, but I mean, if you sit at the top of the Burj Al Arab and something goes wrong beneath you, you know, you might actually kind of feel a bit strange as well. So, you know, it all has to do with perception, and it all has to do with the way that we actually look at our underground spaces. And I think one of the things that I've seen over the years is that we actually, from turning them into confined spaces that you can only get to using a lift or using a system of escalators kind of thing. We see we're now trying to open up the underground spaces. If you look at Les Halles in Paris, for example, you know, we're opening up the underground spaces to make it a much more natural space. The interface between surface and subsurface becomes a lot less distinguishable than we have now. And I think these are all developments that actually start to integrate the underground space developments into the urban fabric. And in that way, the public will start accepting it as being something that is quite normal. I think the more we stress that the underground space that we are creating is something very special or very new or very innovative, you know, the more panicky people get, because, you know, there's nothing as scary as an engineer saying this is very innovative and you're the first user. You know, so I think it's the way we present our projects, the way that we involve the public in those projects that has to do with this as well.
Yeah, I think it also goes back to the maturity of the codes. The codes, some of these events occurred a long time ago, and we can deal with them now. We know how to manage it, and we know how to solve these problems. So I think, Ilka?
Okay, I agree also. If you look what happened in 2011 in Japan, earthquake and tsunami, there were almost no structural damages in metro tunnels. And if you have your technical systems in tunnels, it's very difficult for vandalism or terrorists to attack them. What's easier to put down your cables in the air? So tunnels are safe.
Skyscrapers.
Yeah.
Just think about 9/11 and the fire problem over there.
Yeah. Any other comments, WK?
I think different kind of infrastructure have different safety concerns itself. You know, for high-rise building, there are concern. Yeah. Fire safety is an issue. Yeah. If you look at 64, and wind loading is an issue. During the super typhoon attack a month ago, you know, many windows in some of the high-rise building got the windows broken. Okay, and then 40 years ago, we have a high-rise building locked down by a landslide, and more than 60, 70 people die in that landslide. I think we have to admit that, okay, underground space development or tunnel basement got its own risk. Fire safety, flooding could be an issue, and but that's no insurmountable problem. people think, okay, underground space, I know it seems to more risky because we don't have experience yet. For many high-rise building, because only several decades, people learn how to face the risk. And there are many solutions already in place to tackle all these risks. For basement, etc., it's something still new to many people. But I don't see the problem is surmountable.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lim?
Yeah, Singaporeans somehow are quite paranoid about safety and security. So every apartment and house in Singapore comes with a bomb shelter, whether you are a bungalow or a 50-story apartment. Every unit comes with a bomb shelter. But when you have no access to a bomb shelter at home, where do you go? You run to the underground MRT station. Many of them are shelters. So they are a very safe structure. But I must say also, when you try to incorporate safety structure into some of these underground spaces, again, it adds to the cost. So I think when we think about underground space, we should think of a smart use of the underground space that minimize the need to incur very expensive costs to strengthen them. So, certain spaces you don't need to put in so much ventilation. Certain users don't need so much ventilation. It helps to save the cost. Or whether if we think of underground space as a system, whether there's a way of co-locating certain complementary users and create a cluster of underground space that share common facilities, whether it's for escape, for ventilation, and so forth. Again, it can help us to manage the cost a bit better.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So this is really about the complexity of the surface and the shallow subsurface, and it's really about what data we've got. So I know that Singapore are starting to develop BIM models and all this sort of stuff. So gathering the data. So it's about how to try to do that and manage that better. I know Singapore, you're thinking of 3D cadastral systems. So those sort of things, how do we map out the underground and how do we manage that a bit better as well? Because that's what we're looking at in terms of future, and how to integrate data that we already have into existing models that we will populate and expand in the future. How are we going to do that? Any comments?
Yes. I was thinking that humanity passes in the digital area through phases. I mean, we're already in the first phase where we have already digitized everything and we've put it somewhere in a computer. And thus we created real and information chaos. The next phase is to find the ways to make all this information reliable and retrievable. So it is a big challenge. It is a big challenge. We thought that the biggest part of the problem is just to have all the information digitized. And now we understand that digitized information is something or is nothing without a way to understand it. So I think that we will fight a lot in order to find ways to make the information retrievable and reliable.
If I look at the situation in the Netherlands, then we started out with what we call a voluntary system, whereby industry itself had to regulate itself in terms of where all the cables and where all the pipes located, and there was a register that was accessible. But then we found that as-built drawings or location of cables weren't always there where they were meant to be. And I think after a couple of accidents and everything, the voluntary system kind of shifted into a regulated system. But at the same time, I think there came this awareness that the subsurface is there for more things than just placing your cables and pipes in, and it has a lot more to give to a city or to a nation in terms of ecosystem services that are present below the surface as well. So So this actually became quite a complicated situation, but we now have a what they call a base register where we need to actually kind of register everything that is below the surface. That is the idea. It will take some time. Obviously, with the new technologies nowadays, it becomes a lot easier to get this information. But the concept is that we now have a law that says that anything that is below the subsurface needs to be registered, and it needs to be accessible by someone who wants to go and do something, so that he knows what is there and what he needs to take into account. That's the theory, anyway.
You know, some utility companies don't want people to know where their utility, pipes are and cables.
Yeah, I think that's that. I think that's an argument from the 18th century, I would say, really. I mean, in the past, I think we all thought that we needed to keep secrets, and then we got Google Maps, and everybody could zoom in on any military installation you liked, and then the military said, we don't like that, so let's blot it out, and everybody said, oh, anything that's blotted out must be a military installation. So, so I think we're coming into a new age in where information is freely available, is being shared, whether you like it or not. So we better get to terms with that, and then ask ourselves, okay, so what are we doing? Are we just trying to prevent somebody from knowing there's a gas line there or a water line because they might actually use that for terrorist purposes or whatever? Or are we saying, okay, we're actually trying to prevent a major disaster and somebody digging into that water line and cutting off the water supply of the city?
Any other comments from the other panelists? Elke?
So in late 80s, we made a decision in the city of Helsinki that all information is in one place. All the operators, they give their data, and there is one service. And it's open every day from 8 until 4 p.m. Anybody who is building something must come, and he has a map about the roads of utilities, and those who are doing this job permanently, they have they can do it by their own computers. They don't have to come to us. Yeah. But you have to give your information. There is no way to say no.
Okay. That's good. Any other comments? WK?
In Hong Kong, the individual utility companies, they look after their own record. So if you have a development, then you just write to individual company, ask for the information. There is also some agency trying to put together all the information so that you can have a one-stop service. That's been done, but not yet in full operation. And I want to talk about the concept of utility corridor. I think there are benefits of doing that, but it's quite expensive, and especially for existing urban area, because you can imagine all these research are already there, and the roads are congested. You have to take out and then construct a new utility corridor and put everything together there. It's not easy. For a new development area, it could be done, I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem of retrofitting existing cities to these sort of things is quite difficult, I think. Mr. Lim? Yeah.
Just add a small comment. I think in the case of Singapore, we are doing what the speakers are sharing. We are quite far from having a completed system. We've set up a portal requiring for new works, as-built utility location and depth and so on, to a very fine degree of accuracy to be captured. So any subsequent work, they have an accurate idea of what is down below the sidewalk. But I think the historical data is the one that is very challenging. And the moment the system doesn't offer you a very accurate 100% information of what lies below, I think whoever is doing the work is going to do a scanning and survey again. So it doesn't quite help save the work. But I think over time, once the system is built up, it will go a long way to facilitate.
Yeah, so it's a reliability of data, it's accuracy of data. Once you know that it's reliable, you'll use it more and trust it. Okay. So the next slide is on is on that slide showing the progression of the metro systems in Tokyo, right? And the question really is it inevitable that we're just going to go deeper and deeper and deeper? So, in contrast to the Crossrail that took the bold step to go shallow and cost them a lot of money to go shallow, just from a convenience perspective, so that was something that they did. So is it inevitable that we will have to go deeper and deeper in terms of underground space?
If you're a follower of Elon Musk, I think it is inevitable. I mean, he suggests that we do have to go deeper and deeper and deeper to keep our cars flowing in the cities. But I kind of take that with a pinch of salt. I think it has to do with you have to look at geology. And the reason that they have the situation in London, as far as I know, is because they have something called London clay. And they would like to have everything inside that layer. And if you go below that layer, you're coming into all kinds of other problems. So, and they're kind of discovering that the London clay layer is actually already rather full. If I look in my own country again, if we dig about a meter below the surface, you run into the water table, which basically means that if you go 60 meters deep, you've got quite a lot of water pressure on your structure. So the limitation there is then the water pressure. You just can't envisage going down below 80 meters or further, because you would have to withstand enormous pressures. In other countries, you have geologies where you don't have those problems, or maybe you have them in a different way. So I think in this whole idea that there's an unlimited amount of space beneath our cities is totally ridiculous. There is not. The space beneath our cities is actually very limited, and that's depicted by something that is there, which is known as geology. That is going to determine what you can actually do, and this is why we need to go towards planning of underground spaces, so that we know that we can match the needs of the city with the possibilities that the subsurface is offering us.
So I think we know every city is different in terms of geology and ground conditions, and each have their own challenges. But anyway.
Yes, of course there are big geological differences. I'm a mining engineer by background. I know it very well. But if you see the big picture, you will understand that something about the trend. And the trend is, if there is a social value produced, which is money produced, there are no technical barriers. First thing first. Which means that understanding the big picture and following some changes in the legislation worldwide, we can notice that there are a trend for dividing the underground space in 3 levels. The first level, the shallow subsurface for utilities. The second one for transportation, and the deep underground for any other use. Which means, more or less, we are towards this situation. Something like 10 meters for the shallow underground for utilities, to 30 or 50 meters for transportations, and below 50 meters for all the other uses. This is the trend, which means, yes, we have to go deeper and deeper, but we should do it in a planned way.
Okay. Yeah. Any other comments?
You almost took my words. But it's a question of planning. Like on-ground planning, also underground planning, you need to see to the future, several decades ahead. So, for example, we built our first utility tunnels in the depth of 60 meters, just to prevent the ground above, because it's much easier. We don't need exits every 100 meters. We need maybe 1 exit per 2 kilometers.
So you were trying to avoid future conflicts by putting it deeper straight away. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I also would say that planning is a key work. Because if you do it in an unplanned manner, then everybody's put into their own. Then in some time later, then when somebody need to construct something new, there's no choice, because you have to go deeper because we feel constrained. And that's also the purpose of one of the purpose that we in Hong Kong we developed the Cave Master Plan. We are not talking about, because in the past, there's a rock reserve there that's suitable for underground space development. But if you do it in unplanned manner, you just put it in a location that you think, is suitable for you. But for the same area, if you have a more proper thinking about layout, then the same area could house more facilities. And I think without proper planning, then just put it ad hocly, then at the end you find that you are underutilizing the area. Same for underground space. If you do not have a proper planning, you will underutilize the space.
Yeah.
You need optimization.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree up to a point of what's being said, and what Dimitrios was saying about the layers. I would argue that the depth of those layers will vary. Is dependent, as we said, on the situation. But I think there's another consideration which we need to make, is which it isn't by default that any layer is to be used for transport. I mean, what we're seeing more and more in Europe and for example in Germany is the use of the underground space to produce energy or to heat and cool the houses. So you actually get, you have all these piles beneath the houses are actually then becoming part of energy systems. So the city is then needs to ask itself, what am I going to use the underground space for? Do I want to use it for future transportation systems? Do I want to use it for energy systems? For both? What about those water layers that are there? Are they possible water reservoirs for the future? So you could actually envisage that below the city you might actually get no-go areas where you can say, look, we can't. So the whole idea of planning goes a little bit further than just thinking, okay, we designate certain layers for certain applications, because layers by definition are horizontal, whereas other applications are a lot more vertical than we might think.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, it's a question about spatial planning. You have to plan where you build the new ways for metros, and then you don't allow any geothermal wells in those areas. And if you allow, you will buy them away when you need this.
But you need to consider whether the need for energy is bigger than the need for transportation.
Of course.
So it's not like, let's see where we place the metros in future and what is left over can be used for energy. What I'm trying to point out is that the big discussion at the moment is, it is all about renewable energy, and that's kind of taking over now.
Yeah, but Hans, you can also build these geothermal wells under metro.
Of course.
Yeah.
And wells need much
But-
more at the ground.
So I think the consensus is planning is important. So why is Helsinki the only one with a statutory plan for the underground? Why don't we have more plans like that? Why do other governments not have that?
You must ask the other governments.
Okay, okay.
I would argue that's not the case, and I would actually say that I think that Helsinki has a master plan, and they were maybe the first to do so. But there's a lot of countries that are now actually following up on this.
Yeah, no,
I think the lack is not a lack of master plans. I think there's a lack in planning methodology when it comes to the underground space. I mean, it's the engineers, it's the geologists that are kind of driving this process. But if you talk to urban planners and you say, well, what methodologies are there from a planning perspective to look at the subsurface?
Yeah.
That's still a long way off.
No, well, it goes back to your point, Ilka. You are the representative for the planners, the planners in Helsinki. So why are the planners not here?
They trust.
They trust you. Okay, that's good. Okay. Sorry. Dimitri.
I was thinking that planning is always later than needed. This is a problem with planning. Because we understand the necessity of planning very late. This is the case in underground space. This creates a problem. The other thing is that we can also raise the same question. Why human beings are so reluctant to take actions now for climate change? It is the same in the behavior. We are very reluctant to understand a necessity that goes in the far future, and the consequences lies over there. That's why we shouldn't wait for the public to be in the front of this effort. It is a policy issue, It is an issue that can be raised by the scientific committee. Our organization has a goal exactly this. We understand the necessity of this, and we're trying to make a bridge between the necessity and the decision makers. I understand that it is a big problem that all the other cities are so late to plan their underground space. There are here and there examples, but we should not count just on examples. We should seek for a trend, and we do not have this trend in our modern societies yet.
Mr. Lim?
I think these 2 days we have heard quite many good examples how the different cities are trying to exploit the use of underground space. And I think Hong Kong has set a very good example how to do this a lot more systematically, almost as a master plan. We did visit Helsinki to learn from them, looking at originally it was a draft and now it's fully in place. So we are in a way catching up, learning how to extend we've been doing long-term planning for use of space above ground. Looking into the future, I think underground becomes a very important resource for us. So we are trying to see how we can use the same systematic way of looking at the long-term requirement, how to plan the use of underground space a lot better. I think there are a lot of room for us to learn from the others. If I have a couple of minutes just to share something we are working on over the last few years, we have developed sort of a national infrastructure plan to look at the next 50 years, what Singapore would need in terms of infrastructure. We roughly map out major land use needs for the next 50 years, and together with staging for the various major land uses. And with that, we also map out what are the supporting infrastructure required to support those development plans. And with that foresight of infrastructure requirement, we can now try to map those that needs to go underground way ahead of time. And it does make a big difference because that 30 or 50 years timeline give us the opportunity to see whether there's room for us to co-locate certain corridor together. So when you implement it, you'll be at a fraction of the cost. You'll make it a lot more feasible. And we can then also safeguard the space. If you want to pull a certain train line, you want to pull a certain cable corridor at a certain level, you can safeguard the space to avoid potential conflict along the way. So I think we now have the need map out. The next stage is to understand the geology, to understand the different engineering requirement, to then map it out into the implementation stage.
Yeah, so I think long-term planning, as you say, is key to make sure conflicts don't occur in the future. So the next slide, going away from that, the next slide is about the beauty of the underground, right? You know, I love these pictures. You know, I've never been to the Stockholm Metro, but I want to go and have a look at it because it's absolutely awesome. You know, fire on the roof would, you know, send the fire engineers crazy. But, you know, I think they're fantastic photographs. So any comments on the beauty of the underground, you know, what we create and how we use it?
I started with this. We have to put some additional perspectives in the way we understand the underground space. Definitely, the underground space nowadays is a commodity. It is in a scarcity, so it becomes a commodity. Money is making out of it, so we have to deal with it as a commodity. But in the same time, it is used from millions or billions of people. So, is the new hotspot of the public space. So the aesthetics of the public space is quite an issue. So for many years, I would say, with the exception of the Moscow Metro or the Blue Line line Stockholm, the standard paradigm was function over form. We should make something functional, well-lit, well-ventilated, but not so beautiful, more or less typical. Now the trend is to create a very fascinating public space. I like very much your examples yesterday, and I would like, I missed the opportunity to raise a question, I will do it now. I think that there is a potential in exploiting the special characteristics of the underground space itself, the intriguing, the mystery, the caves, and all this. The blue line paradigm took advantage from this example. I think that the trend is that we will reinvent that the underground space itself can be very beautiful. And I think that the new trend in the underground metros will be towards this direction. Not to make the underground space look like something different. Okay.
Sorry, okay, yeah, sorry, you go.
I agree with this Stockholm Metro example.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, yeah,
Yeah.
to my eyes. And it's even cheaper than a traditional way. You see that bedrock in Stockholm, it's self-supporting. You don't need to build a house inside.
Same as Hong Kong. It's
Yeah.
like that. We can do that,
Yeah.
it's no problem.
But I know there are...
Even the water makes waterfalls.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, we can do that. We can have waterfalls as well, no problem.
This is the case in Blue Line.
But
They make waterfalls in the water.
but it depends about the geological circumstances.
Yes.
Of course.
But, for example, in Lyon, we were together with Han and some others, I think 2011, they had this new project. 2 kilometers of tunnel for pedestrians, cyclists, and buses. And excellent gneiss.
It's a multimedia experience, yeah.
But still, they wanted to build some half a meter lining inside.
Which is not.
And I was asking why. They said in the site, people are afraid of seeing a rock. So this happened in France. We are not afraid. I think we shouldn't be afraid of seeing natural rock.
Yes, but you all gonna love the Blue Line in Stockholm.
I mean, it's very situational. I mean, I live 4.5 meters below sea level, and not everybody is as happy about that as I am. But you know, so it depends on the situation. In the book Antonio Canaro and I wrote, we actually quote the Moscow Metro, and we go into we came across in our research a very nice article why the Moscow Metro looked like the way it looks, and the kind of story runs basically that it looked like that because. At the time, they wanted to offer the laborers an experience when they on their way home, if you like, to when they came from the work. But it also said they wanted to kind of avoid what was happening in the West, where it was all very functional, where it was all like from an engineering perspective, you know, we build it, we don't want to make it any bigger than it needs to be, kind of thing. And I think this contrast is interesting because you now see that I mean the station in Naples is one of the latest examples, I think. But even in the city of Düsseldorf, there's the Wehrhahnlinie, where they every station on that line had a different architect, and the architect had to compulsory work together with an artist on creating an installation that would give a unique kind of touch and feel to that station. If you then go to the not the Jubilee line, the Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, every station looks the same. That was also a decision made by the client, if you like, to say, okay, this is the way, and the only way you can distinguish the stations is by the name plaque, kind of thing. So. In my opinion, I agree with the other speakers, what they said. What we need to look at when it comes to underground spaces is you need to offer an experience to people, but in a way that holds true for any building that you're making. And I think when it comes to underground space, you offer people a very nice interior, if you like, whereas if you have a high-rise building, you know, it's all about the exterior. But in this case, the underground spaces offer architects something beautiful to work with.
Yeah, definitely people need to feel comfortable about what they're walking through and using. WK, any comments on that? How can we make Hong Kong beautiful?
I think Hong Kong, you can see
already? Sorry.
the design, they look very functional. Not only the underground space, even the buildings in Hong Kong, you see many look similar. And if you go to mainland China, Shanghai, Beijing. The building, any of them looks. There are many special architects, and I think Hong Kong there's room for making it more special, more artistic. Yeah.
I hope so. I hope we can convince the fire department that we don't need compartmentalization, we don't need sprinklers, we don't need all that sort of stuff. But anyway, we'll work that out. Sorry.
We have once a year a day called Open Helsinki. And then there is a possibility to visit the wastewater tunnel. There are hundreds and hundreds of people willing, and only one or two are the winners. But we are doing that as a work to control, but we don't want to go there again if it's not, but people want to have new experiences. And for most people, underground is one of those things they want to feel.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Lim?
I think Andrew yesterday gave a very good presentation on how we can manage underground space to make it look really beautiful. But actually, in many cities, the shallow underground space has become so extensive that they merged with what is above ground. And when you're in there, you can't tell whether you're underground or not. So I think as we expand the use of underground space, we need to start to think about what Andrew mentioned yesterday, which is about placemaking. How to make places out of those underground spaces. And it may not be every station you have to create a marvelous artwork out of it, but the important location you want to relate to the identity, the character of the area. I think we should do that. In Singapore, when Andrew was still driving the projects of the rail stations, there's also the other issue. The architects go overboard. Almost every station you want to create an architectural icon out of it. Imagine a single line, there isn't a line identity. Every station, you want an architectural statement that sits sometimes very awkwardly in that neighborhood, very quiet residential neighborhood. Suddenly there's this icon that is quite out of place. So I think there's a place for good design, tasteful design. There's a place for doing proper placemaking, especially in important location. But there's also a place for some consistency and not trying to create icon out of everything.
Okay, well that sort of follows on to the last slide, making it appropriate, I suppose, and it's about the dollar sign, right? So, we know that it was more expensive in general, from a financial perspective, from the capex to go underground. No, I'm just mentioning. So you're quite willing to challenge this. So, we have a perception that it costs more to go underground. So how do you convince the private sector and others that actually it's not? Sorry, let's start with Ilka. Yeah.
It depends what you calculate. If you can calculate the land property, it's much more cheaper to build underground some facilities and then use the land for another purposes, which are much more worth.
Yeah, the relocation or the avoidance of surface ground being occupied, maybe. Sorry.
There was a workshop someday.
Well,
Okay. There are many tables showing that in the construction cost, the underground works is much more expensive. But when you co-estimate operational costs and maintenance costs, the picture is changing a lot. But the game changer is when you estimate the externalities, when you monetize the social benefits, when you monetize the functionality in the city. At the end of the day, the question of how fast the underground works will take place, it is a question of money. Because our society relies on limited resources and money, and the decision makers need some figures. And as a field, as a community, we will be much more able to convince them if we produce some figures. And the only way to do so is to use some modern tools like environmental economics, which is able to monetize these latent values. And sorry for that, I would like to put a word in the previous theme. Can I?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Just put 2% of the budget to the aesthetics. It will produce much more money than you think. 2% of the total budget to the aesthetics of the stations.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Lim first.
Mr. Lim first.
Mr. Lim. Yeah, Mr. Lim. Yeah.
No, just to substantiate the point that the two gentlemen made. The two Caven project that we implemented, one for storage of oil at Jurong, the other one for the storage of ammunition by the military. Just the two projects save us 360 hectares of land. And that is the size of the whole Marina Bay, which now is probably only 10% developed. And for the 10% development, it has generated more than $100 billion investment. So you look at from that perspective, I think the benefit, as you said, you cannot just look at what you derive out of the Caven that you created. Also, I think there are opportunities to create underground space opportunistically. So as we dig and create a MRT station, for example, there are a lot of incidental spaces that are created. Instead of backfilling it, you can create those spaces and integrate with the adjoining development. That cost of creating that space is almost negligible.
I would like to argue that cost is not an issue.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Good.
And I do that because yesterday we gave a presentation here, Anthony and I, about the financing of these projects. So there's a paper in the proceedings on this. There's a whole chapter in our book on this as well. And what we say is that the perspective with which we look at these projects is wrong when we only look at cost. So we need to get rid of that dollar sign and we need to start thinking in terms of value. And it's exactly what you just said, Mr. Lim, it's about the value that we create. But then the trap that we get into is that we start quoting things like societal value, externalities, and we get into all the economics of kind of proving that our projects are creating such a lot of value then. And it's not about the creation of value, because the trick is that you actually need to capture that value. If you're able to capture the value, then the actual cost doesn't really matter anymore, because you're capturing the value, and it's more about a sensible investment that's being made. And I would like to argue also against the idea that we have limited budgets. Yes, they are limited, but that's usually the public funding. There is an enormous amount of private money out there that we are not even looking at when we look at these projects in terms of how can we actually attract that money to start creating these underground spaces that the cities need. And all the challenges that cities are now facing, they are facing a lot of challenges. There's no way we're going to solve all those challenges with public funding. So we need to become a lot smarter in trying to get these to the private funding. And whether that is in public-private partnerships or whether that's through private initiatives or whatever, there are various ways you can actually start looking at these projects in a more integrated way and trying to capture that value rather than just quoting the societal value that's being created and think somebody will come along with a big bag of money, because that's not going to happen.
Any other comments? WK?
Yeah, I think, as you said, there's a general feeling that, okay, underground space development is more expensive. I think, yeah, this is true if you look at the financial assessment. But if you look at the economic assessment, yeah, then very often you will find underground space development could be more economical, beneficial. And also, that's for this reason, now we have put in place a technical circular and a ministry circular that require our engineer to consider economic assessment for the project when they consider options, not just financial assessment. And yeah.
But some of it's quite, some of it, the intangibles, for example, like visual impact and things that you maybe can't quantify in a meaningful way, and there's the willingness to pay sort of survey that you mentioned in the workshop is quite interesting, asking people how much it is of value to them if there was something, or nothing. So those are quite interesting concepts to include. So I think with that, I would like to sort of move over to the audience. So I've been given a list of the individual questions asked from the floor. So we will now go on to the floor session. So these are completely random, I think. on the first one? Oh, sorry, it's on the side, okay. So which is the first one? That's one. Okay, so in major Asian cities, the development plans are not put, are to put people underground and keep the cars on the surface levels. Why? Why don't you build highways underground? Why build more car parks to city centres? Okay, Mr. Lim?
This is something quite close to my heart, so I'll give this a go. We are trying to push for car light going forward. And I think we now have one last remaining highway that we are building. It was decided some probably 10 years back that there's a need to add a new north-south expressway in Singapore. And that will be our last highway because we have curbed the growth of cars. There's no more increase in the car population in Singapore. Hopefully over time we will reduce it further. But of this last highway, which we have decided that it has to go underground as a tunnel, we are using it to divert existing major trunk road above ground so that the cars get brought down into the tunnel, and the road corridor above ground will be converted into a transit corridor for buses, express buses and local buses, and also a lot more spacious cycling lane as a major cycling highway connecting from north to south. So we are pursuing this. We are looking for opportunities that we can where we can do more by over time, hopefully reclaiming more road spaces for human.
Okay. So, sorry, Ilka?
Can I continue the question?
Okay.
What are you going to do for the existing highways?
We are actually quite a number of our highways are built as tunnel, and we are, in fact, when we move, we are in the process of moving the port out from the city to the western end of the island. As we move the port out, you suddenly will realize when there was a ceremony to relocate the port, I was standing in the port looking back into the city and see this Great Wall of China. There's a highway running across, separating the port from the city. When the port is gone and we're extending the city, that highway cannot remain standing there. So the highway will have to go. Either sink underground or get rid of the highway or turn into a green corridor or something.
Yeah.
So I think as part of the planning process, we will make it disappear.
Well, there's always discussions in Hong Kong about Island East Corridors, how to get that moved underground. That would be a fabulous thing to do. Anyway, sorry.
I think that the question is wrong. The question, I mean, I think that there is no good solution either way. Because if we have to choose among cars and the people, there is no answer. Actually, we should move towards a better, a more sustainable mobility in the cities, which is the so-called BMW model, biking, metro, and walking. So, because we have the experience of one of the most controversial and costly underground projects, to put all the highways in Boston one level underground, which didn't make any good. Actually, the future is to replace the cars with mass railway systems, plus biking, plus walking. This is the future for the cities. That's why I said the question is wrong.
I'll just make one comment. I don't think the question is wrong. I think the question is whether cars need to remain in that in the answer. And I was at a congress of ACUUS a couple of weeks ago, which are the International Society of City and Regional Planners. And we just commented on that the urban planners are always walking behind us, and then they need to get up to speed. And I don't agree with that. What the urban planners are saying is cars are going to disappear. So the reality is that within maybe 10 to 20 years, cars are just going to disappear. Car ownership is going to disappear. It's not longer going to be accepted that you own your own car. And whether those are becoming automated vehicles or whether there's going to be other ways of transporting, there's a lot of thinking going on about this. But what I want to stress is that there are already cities now looking at their underground car parks and thinking, okay, so what kind of new use can we give these when all the cars disappear from the cityscape? That is the reality that we are facing, and that is what we need to start dealing with.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to the next question because there's quite a few questions here.
Sorry.
One more. So how much of underground space is financed by central government funding? How to attract greater private finance into the development of underground space? So that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I can quote a project on this, which is the Cargo Souterrain project. We presented that briefly yesterday in our presentation as well, which is an dedicated underground cargo system, which is being built in Switzerland. And the interesting fact about that system is that it's totally privately financed. There is not a Swiss franc of government money going into that project. So there seems to be a possibility to make our projects so attractive that you can find the users who want to pay for it, and you can find the investors who want to invest in it, and you can actually generate a very nice return on investment, because that's all it needs.
Yeah, but that's the business case. Sometimes the government has to support through some incentives or some funding, or because the economics is that they will get the benefits of some of that through higher taxes or higher revenues. So should government give that back in more sort of incentives to allow underground space development? Because it's been tried in Singapore and Orchard Road. Some success, some not success. In terms of giving a subsidy or a grant to build the subways. So, these are the sort of things that maybe that question is diverted to. So, WK, I don't know if you want to comment.
I think for a private developer, if they can earn money, they will do it. Okay. So actually, Hong Kong, say Rockhaven, some private developer they are saying that they are willing to invest and develop, put things underground, but there are hurdles that the government need to help them to overcome. For instance, the land use planning, because otherwise, even they want to buy a piece hillside to do development, they can't do it because the land is not zoned for the purpose. And same for underground space development in the urban area. Sometimes some developer they want to build underground shopping street, connecting building together. But again, because there are administrative hurdles, the land issue, land ownership issue, etc., that prohibit them doing so. So often I think it's not just the money issue. There are the other regulatory issue, some other land issue, etc. That prevent it happening. Yes.
Mr. Lim?
I was visiting Japan to look at some of this underground development. I was told by the electric companies that actually they have no choice because there's just no land for them to build a new infrastructure anywhere else. So by default, they will approach private landowners, strike a deal, and insert their facilities underground. So learning from that, we are now starting to implement underground substation in Singapore. I think in our case, we try to use both a carrot and stick approach to make it happen. In a way, the UIA, we are involved in the land allocation process. We also decide, we also manage the land use zoning process. So we are able to find the right location, in a way nudge the companies to try and do that. But along the way, we try to facilitate and help them. There are a lot of regulatory policy hurdle for you to do something new underground. So you need to convince other ministry, other agencies to either make exception, change their regulation. So we play that role. We try to champion for them, get all the clearances from other agencies to make the route a lot easier. And then incentivize them by allowing them to build a 40-story office tower block above what they are building. Of course, with some premium to be paid. So I think there are roles that government can play to facilitate the process.
Smooth out the process and take away the risks and uncertainty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So next question. Next question. No. So surface guidelines are not applicable to underground in many cases. What are the standards and regulations specifically for planning and construction of underground space development in countries? Any suggestions on the best examples? So Ilka, are you the best one?
Okay, of course we need regulations. but they are not enough. I think that practice is what we need, and it's not an easy question, but mainly I think to have a good standard means that you do cooperate. Of course, we need also new guidelines for underground, but I think this is not the right way.
Yeah.
Just to do guidelines. We do it all the time, and we update it all the time. But
I think it's isn't the question round about where's the surface now? Where is it within the urban landscape? So, the surface is not there. So, as David mentioned, in his urban mangroves, there is various levels that people then work through and follow through the city. So the guidelines for podiums versus surface versus underground, how do they interact with each other in terms of uses, in terms of the way people operate there?
Yeah. Again, we did some research on this for our book, and I agree in a certain sense. If you look at construction, there are maybe not as many guidelines as you would like, but it differs from country to country. If you look at the US, there's actually quite a lot of NFPA guidelines on fire protection when it comes to subsurface facilities, and not just tunnels, but the Kansas City development, the industrial facility they have there, kind of made Kansas City change their building ordinance and adapt that. Then it came into the International Building Code, which is used in the US, which has a section on subsurface construction in it as well. If you go to other countries, they have a more general wording in their building codes that would apply equally to buildings at the surface and below the surface. When it comes to the actual planning guidelines, it's like I said, there's the methodology is still being invented, if you like, in terms of how do we actually get a process for planning the subsurface that is that you can actually repeat in other cities as well, which is not specific to one city. So how do you get to a general methodology that can actually be repeated in other areas?
Okay, Dimitri?
Yeah, I will tell you a few things about this special case of Subtropolis. You may know it. It is the Kansas case. There is a man behind this, a visionary man called Ron Woodard. There is a very beautiful story about him. He said that he survived from 2 wars, 2 air crashes, and 3 divorces. And he's behind the planning of Subtropolis. Subtropolis used to be an underground quarry, and it transformed into a vast logistic center. What was the main problem? Fire regulation. For years, they spent so much time in finding the way to get the permission, because there was no any fire regulation for such a place. They copy some rules from the underground parks, and they made the adjustment. So nowadays there are so many underground uses that paved the way. There are so many regulations in our hands. Mm-hmm. So this is not so difficult that it used to be.
Okay, good.
Yeah, the last question, any suggestion on best examples?
Yeah.
I don't think there is any best example in the world.
Right.
Because different cities and countries, they have their own circumstances. For a city like Hong Kong, where there are very sophisticated statutory control on development, then I think guideline will help, because very often when we suggest people to consider underground space development, first thing they say, what are the guidelines? Because they want to get approval. And if the guideline in place, they can know, okay, what I need to do to get approval. So they can get the project done more efficiently. Before guideline, they have to do from scratch, and they have to go through all the different process. It's not easy. But of course, for some other cities, whether if this control is not that stringent, then it's better to just give them freedom. You don't need guideline. So I don't think there's any guideline that is suitable for everyone.
I think there's some overarching guidelines such as fire, ventilation, and so on that you need to follow. So there are some basic ones, I think, yeah, overall. So I'll go on to the next question. This is additional cost. I think this is similar to some discussions that we had earlier about cost. So, no. How do you see future cities adopting underground facilities in living areas? What are some of the most innovative ideas you can think of? Panelists?
Planners first?
Planners first? Okay.
Or practitioners, like Finland?
I think when we look at the way that we are creating underground spaces beneath urban areas at the moment, we can see linear developments, which are basically all the metro lines that we're constructing, and we can see basements below buildings, which is basically what is happening there. I think, with few exceptions, the one thing that is missing is connectivity. So we seem incapable of creating an urban fabric, if you like, below the surface. So I think when we start thinking in terms of how do we actually link these things, why is it that I need to park my car 4 stories down in an underground car park, then go back to the surface in a lift, cross the street, go into another building, and then go down 3 stories because I want to go to the movies there or something. You know, why can't I do that? So this is one issue. The other issue is, I think that is a very important issue, is the issue of inclusiveness. If we see the way that we are creating our underground spaces, they are not inclusive in the sense that they are often limited, open. They are only open when the metro is operating. They're only open when the shops are open. They are not accessible by everyone. There's an example of a shopping mall in Kuala Lumpur where you have security guards waiting there, and there's a sign saying the management has the right to refuse you entrance. So, I'm not saying that the management shouldn't have that right, but you can't say that that is a public space that is inclusive and open to all. So if we're really serious about creating urban underground space, we need to consider the issue of connectivity. We need to consider the issue of how public are the spaces that we are creating, and are they contributing to inclusiveness in the city. And if we can do that, that would be, in my terms, that would be really innovative.
Okay, any other comments? Dimitri?
Yeah. I heard something yesterday which I liked very much. Culture on the top, function underground. Living on top, function underground. So I like very much this kind of future vision, which is just a step forward from our reality. We can have cities more livable, more walkable cities without the so-called, from Professor Chian, the urban disease, from the pollution and congestion, things like that. By putting transportation underground and leaving the open space for housing, for recreational activities. On the other hand, we can have a very intriguing and pleasant underground space, a livable public space. These are some trends already being in our presence, like in the Singapore example, but it needs some leadership. I mean, I'm back to the question about the private sector and the money over there. I'm not sure that we will convince the private sector to invest in underground projects, because the game changers are the externalities and the social benefits like that. It's much more easier a public authority to be convinced, plan the space, and take the necessary measures. But we are not far, because the situation in our modern cities is unlivable. We will be pushed to this direction.
Is it my turn?
Ilka, yes.
So about culture. When you go to swimming pool, when you go to movies, when you go to theater,
You're on the ground.
museum, why do they have to be on ground?
I mean something.
Yeah.
Well, there's functional spaces and there's supporting infrastructure that I suppose should go underground. You know,
Yeah.
there are things that we don't need to see, but we need to see the light.
Yeah.
We need to be in the surface. We need to enjoy the surface.
But
And the
I
more-
also think we need to be careful. I mean, I accept that the cars are killing the city, okay? And there's a lot of pollution, but I think we should not kid ourselves that if we then bring the cars below the surface, that the pollution is gone. I don't know where the pollution is then going to go, because those cars are still emitting the same fumes that they are emitting when they're above the surface. The
won't be
one
electric.
issue that we really need to be careful about is that we start looking at the subsurface as like the urban surface layer, that we just create all the surfaces there that we don't want at the surface. When we look at the future of our cities, if we look at the way things are changing, there may be cities where people do not want to be at the surface anymore because of heat or because of cold or because of storms or because of excessive rainfall. So there are so many things that we can actually start using our subsurface for, you know, but we're still thinking in terms of the old paradigms, if you like. You know, we're transitioning to a totally new world, and underground space can play a role in that. But we need to let go of the old ideas that, you know, that what we don't want to see, let's hide it underground. We need to make a little bit more intelligent, get intelligent solutions and make intelligent decisions as to how we want to use the subsurface.
Okay, Mr. Lim, you want to?
Yeah, I think in future when we are looking at planning, looking at city, we should start to think in terms of 3 dimensions. So there's whether it's above ground, underground, we should look at the overall space that's available for us to make a good city out of the space that's available. So I've been trying to make this point to our treasury people that we should look at all the space as a portfolio, and within a portfolio rationalize what are the users you think would make sense to go out underground, what would make sense to stay above ground, and then decide what to do with the underground space. Rather than each case you have to go and argue and look at the cost benefit, whether this particular use makes sense or not. When you look at the demand and the supply overall as a portfolio, I think you can rationalize things a lot easier. So I think that may be the way that we want to think about going forward.
Okay. So WK, you want the last word?
I think we don't need to go underground just for the purpose of going underground, because there are different areas that maybe a surface development is better. When we study the potential of underground space development in Hong Kong in urban area, we look at different areas. For example, for Central, where there's already existing flyover network for pedestrian connection. Then the underground space is very congested. We don't need to construct another layer of subway just for the purpose of doing it. Yeah, I think same for residential, for living. If people enjoy living above ground, why go for underground?
Well, I think for me, one of the most innovative ideas would for Hong Kong to have the world's largest underground space. That would be very cool, I think. Anyway, so on that, I think we're out of time. I'm told by the executive. So we actually got 17 questions. So I think and there's some very good questions in here we've not covered. I think what I'll do is I'll pass this back to ACUUS and we'll post it on the website, responses to many of these questions, because they're actually quite relevant and need to be answered, I think. So thank you all for posting all those questions. And thank you to all the panelists for a very interesting, invigorating and challenging set of questions and responses. And thank you very much. Thank you.